I've been checking out some AnCap arguments online, trying to get myself back into politics. Obviously, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of England, said he was stepping down the other day. So I guess that is like some sort of semi-big current event that has dipped me back into politics a little bit. You know, remembering all the evil shit that Starmer has put into the laws and all that, and how he fucked up our country. But yeah, looking at AnCap arguments, I stepped out of politics for a little bit, mainly because I just couldn't really get into it. I didn't have much to say, so took a little hiatus for 2 weeks or something, I want to say. And part of it was after that stewardship topic. So I guess this video is a bolt-on, in a way, to the AnCap stewardship topic, because it challenged my ideology, you know, to get a little bit pushed back in that sense. You know, a lot of other AnCaps didn't really like it. I haven't really changed my view. I've just changed the wording in a way that, I mean, I'm not even 100% sure on whether I should change the wording, but, you know, when AnCap start suddenly acting basically a bit like right-wingers, you have to take a step back, you know, because people are letting themselves get angry over a certain subject. They're letting their emotions cloud their judgment, and it's coming in and it's fucking around with their ability to think clearly. And I was saying it was challenging my assumptions, challenging my chosen principles that I had to go on, that were helping me navigate this AnCap space. And then they brought in this alternative for me, stewardship, and it hasn't really got much meat on it. I haven't found anyone really talking about stewardship other than the like 2 people who challenged me on it. And it's kind of like, well, what is this thing? This doesn't really cover all the bases. This doesn't really explain all the things that my previous way of explaining life through an AnCap lens explains stuff. So it's just weird. And then I watched a video. I was watching the White Pillbox. I can't remember the guy's name. It's like an AnCap interview show. There's a guy with glasses and grey hair who's a, you know, AnCap or voluntarist, if you will. To me, those things are interchangeable. They're basically the same thing under 2 names, because Larkin shies away from using AnCap and capitalists, and so does Dankula, even though Dankula follows Hop, and even though Larkin's views are entirely about AnCap. And there are a lot of people on Twitter who are AnCap and they don't bother calling themselves voluntarists. They're like, I mean, I use both terms for myself. They just use AnCap and they're like, you shouldn't be, I mean, same view as me, you shouldn't be scared of using the term capitalist. That's just the commies sneaking into your mind and sort of semi-controlling you via influence, because every commie, every socialist is inherently anti-capitalist. That's another annoying thing about, sometimes that's an annoying thing about using the word AnCap, is it sounds very similar to anti-cap, but it's the opposite. AnCap, anarcho-capitalist, anti-capitalist, fucking commie or socialist. Yeah, so there are all these little word things you kind of worry about, the optics of how words seem similar to other words, and how one word can have 5 meanings in politics, and yeah, it's very deterring from trying to be clear. Anyway, I was watching this White Pill podcast. I can't remember the dude's name, but the dude, I'm subscribed to him. Just search it on YouTube. It's like the White Pill podcast. And he was interviewing Patrick Smith, who is another AnCap who is friends with and knows Larkin Rose, and who's interviewed Larkin Rose on his channel. I think Patrick Smith's podcast is called the Anarcast. I haven't actually watched that one. Patrick mostly comes off as a good guy, but he also falls prey to this, like, getting emotional over, or letting himself get emotional for a start. I don't know what his background, well, he says his background is like, he got into being an AnCap because he was an engineer and he wanted to buy a car, and as soon as he finally achieved this life's goal of getting this sporty car, cops just started randomly stopping him and being dickheads to him for no reason on the roads, and he had to fight it in the courts and stuff. And he, as an engineer, I guess he just went like, how do I how do I piece this apart? Like, who's behind the cops? What is this system and everything? So I don't know if his background is like my background, where like I'm anti-communist. I came in obviously as an anti-SJW off the back of the other anti-SJWs, like when they were all as one around 2016, 2017, fighting feminism, third wave intersectional feminism, if you want to call it that, which we still have to fight to this day. And that comes with like fighting the left. When you find out that feminism is a breed of socialism and communism, then you're fighting the left. And much later on you find out that the right is the left as well. After lockdowns, that's what got me over that hurdle. Anyway, back to the podcast. If you watch that interview between the White Pill and Patrick Smith was saying some stuff that relates to my stewardship thoughts. He was giving another alternative with parenting and stuff, which was very interesting. So he was saying that when you're a parent and you're raising your kid, and what was interesting, it was a very interesting part of the podcast. There was another cringe part of the podcast later, which I might go into, but firstly, this good part of the podcast, interview episode, he raised some of his kids. Oh yeah, he came from a traditionalist conservative background originally, so he might have been fighting the left at some point, but he raised a couple of his kids when he was a statist, before he was at AnCap. He raised one or two of his kids in an authoritarian way, he was saying, which is just like a typical parent way, like a normie would raise a kid, where, I don't know, there might be capital punishment. Is it capital, or I don't know if it's capital punishment or corporal punishment or corporeal punishment. One of them's the death penalty, so I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when, like, you're smacking your kid for discipline or whatever. You're disciplining your kid using physical means. A lot of people are against that in the modern day. In the day where I come from and how my parents did it to me, is like smacking was like a commonplace thing for discipline. And it's a way of, I mean, you can go too far with it, but it's a way of stopping your kid becoming out of control to the point where they are more powerful than the parent. I don't know if that really worked well, it definitely didn't work in my household. I mean, I'm less out of control, but I'm too timid. My brothers went the opposite direction. They're just insane. So I think it's a mess in my family, as an example. Anyway, I can't remember the term for that. Patrick raised his first kids. I don't know if he did that with them, but he said he raised them in an authoritarian manner, as in he raised them as a traditionalist conservative, which is like he was saying you organize your family like a government, basically. A microcosm. I like that word. Mini government. And he was saying he saw it in that lens. And I thought, I never thought of that before. That's a new one for me. I never thought, like, not normal, typical parenting that we're all used to is authoritarian, because you're making you're kind of seeing your household as a small version of a government. And he's saying that, like, his doctrine, which I haven't bought into this view yet. I haven't jumped into his bandwagon or train on this, but it was interesting and compelling to the point where I might consider it. He's saying that microcosm authoritarian-ish thing where your family is a bit like, and I'm not saying it is like a mini government, but he's saying it's kind of like a mini government. He's saying that's bad, and then like his younger kids grew up, I guess, and then I don't know if he got into another marriage, but he had more kids later on after becoming an AnCap, and he raised those kids with these new views as an anarchist, which he was timid about calling himself at first, which I thought was funny, because he thought, like, the typical view people think, like normies think when they hear the term anarchist, is that, like, that's a crazy person over there. Why would you call yourself an anarchist? That's just isn't that what crazy people call themselves? And then when you get into it and look at the views, you realise, no, it's not crazy. It's literally the best standpoint you can have, the best ideological outlook on life that you can have towards freedom views and property and consent, which are all basically the same thing, and capitalism and anything voluntary. Tangent hopping, in danger of tangent hopping. So he became an anarchist, and he raised his newer kids, how do you say it, younger kids. I don't know if from a different marriage or not. I don't think he said. Might be from the same marriage, I don't know. But he raised them in a freedom way, where he found a way to raise them as a parent where his family wasn't, in his view, like a government microcosm, like a mini bubble government thing. And he said the difference between raising his younger kids in that freedom-ish way and his older kids when he raised them as traditionalist conservative is that it was night and day, as he put it. The difference between his first batch of kids, let's say, and later in life his second batch of kids. Also, I've never heard of people raising kids in that fashion. Like, I've never heard of a family, no one's ever like said that to me. It must exist, but a family who, let's say they have 2 kids and then they raise them and those kids reach near adulthood and they're on this hiatus, you think they're just going to stop having kids at that point. So they're years and years not doing anything, just raising the kids they've got. And those kids reach, I don't know, teenagerhood or near adulthood, and then suddenly he's having 2 more babies at that point, and then he raises them in a completely different way. I think that mind fucked me a bit. Like, I've never heard of that family structure before. Like, maybe you would have had your first 2 kids when you were really young, I guess, like when you're 18 even, 18 or 20, 18, 19, 20. Maybe he had kids then, and then when there was enough time between there and when those kids reached teenagerhood that he and his wife, or maybe a new wife or whatever, was still like fertile, I guess, able to create kids, that they could have 2 more. And like, it's almost there's not almost a generational gap. Like, there's a very big gap between his first 2 kids, it sounded like, and another 2 kids, and then he could raise that second batch of kids in a completely different way to the first batch. I think that was a major mindfuck for me. I was like, I have never heard of this before. How common is this? Is this common? I don't think it is. I think he has a rare family structure, actually, that he's able to even try that. I mean, who tries that? Who has 2 kids really young and then waits like an entire near like 15, 20 years and then has 2 more kids and then raises them differently? Anyway, he was saying night and day the difference. I don't know what his relationship is with his kids who he raised in a so-called authoritarian manner, and have they seen that their dad's raising 2 more younger kids in a more freedom manner and they're like estranged from him or something? I wonder if that's a thing that happened to him. But yeah, I guess the point of it is that he found some sort of way that he decided was that he was going to raise these new kids in such a way that it's freedom-minded, non-authoritarian, no kind of government hierarchy thing. So he said, if you raise your kids as if your family is not like a little government, then they're prepared for the world outside. The world outside is still authoritarian. It still will smash them in the face, like shock them, like surprise them when they get out of their parents' raising and teaching, or stewardship if you like. If we're going down that route, the stewardship of the kids rather than the kids as property of parents, which I still think that's a kind of valid way of describing it, but you know, there's obviously this disparity between 2 types of parent AnCaps, or parent libertarians, and I'm still kind of in the first camp. I'm not in Patrick's camp yet. Maybe I will be. Obviously I don't have kids yet, but that's, you know, that's dependent on how things go in the future for me. But it's just interesting how, so he's not, I guess he's doing little trades with his kids, and I guess he's not telling them off when they do something wrong. He's found a more intelligent and more calculated way of responding to them, like encouragement. And I guess his discipline thing isn't physical discipline. Maybe it's not any other kind of discipline. I don't know if he got into what his replacement for discipline was to keep his kids in line, to stop them going off the rails. I don't know if he might have touched on that subject really briefly and then just moved on in the conversation. But yeah, go and watch that interview, because I think you actually get a lot from it. One thing I will point out though, after this is that there's a cringe bit, which I don't really agree with. So that was, let's move on. That was the interesting thing, the good thing I got from that podcast from Patrick Smith, that kind of adds to this disparity that I'm feeling between raise your kids as if they're your property, because that stops paedophiles. It does stop them. It stops communism, and it stops the government via teachers and schools from raising your kid to be tax cattle, from turning your kid indoctrination, Yuri Bezmenov style, into a socialist like they are, and all these things. That I still believe is important. But I am sympathetic and I am interested in this stewardship thing. I haven't made the jump into it because there's not enough meat on the bone. There's not enough talk or conversation going on about what this stewardship thing is, where you're not really a parent, but you are a parent. And, you know, what is the defense mechanism that that so-called parent has that is like a freedom parent, apparently, but I'm not so sure, that stops the government and socialists and pedos getting their claws into your child? What is the defense mechanism there? I can't really see it. And a lot of these AnCaps, all these people who are calling them AnCaps, I'm getting the feeling they're linos and they're actually rightists, because they're getting really triggered and offended when people bring up family and children, and they're knee-jerking to calling people a pedo without evidence, which, as I described in the last video, is the same as when the Nazis called... try again. Freudian slip. It's the same as when the leftists call anyone mildly to the right of them a Nazi, when, you know, Nazis are a left-wing phenomenon anyway. That's the same thing as calling someone a pedo without evidence. It's just an emotional knee-jerk reaction that has poisoned a lot of politics right now, and it's dumb. It's dumb. It's just like people like Sargon of Akkad going, oh, so the left are calling everyone Nazis, so because we have like a few instances of the left being pedos, we should call everyone pedos if we don't agree with them. And it's like, yeah, but you don't have evidence for this for everyone, and you're actually creating a situation where everyone on your side will not go after evidence and finding out if someone's guilty of having done something like that before calling them that. And then you've got wood chipper, which is the same as punch a Nazi. I'm just thinking of Chris Reagan now because I watched the Snark Tank podcast. He put out a song that was against the whole punch a Nazi leftist phenomenon, and now he's just like got the reverse view of his own politics in 2017. Just turned into a... I mean, I do like... I like watching the Snark Tank because of the comedy, but they have become a bunch of socialists, and it is cringe whenever they talk politics. Anyway, off track. Going on tangents. You can't knee-jerk into calling people a Nazi and then saying it's okay to punch them because you don't know whether they are or not. The same way as you can't knee-jerk into calling someone a pedo and saying you should wood chipper them on the spot because you don't know whether they are or not. You have to know whether people are the thing you're painting them as, else you're just using this as a really emotionally fueled bad political tactic that doesn't work and ends up attacking physically, in some cases, a lot of innocent people who aren't the thing you say they are. So I don't trust those AnCaps who are just like... I understand the Epstein thing. Like, it seems like there are documents and files on this guy and the people he's talked to who turn out to be celebrities and politicians. There's like evidence. It seems to be that there's a lot of evidence there. There are actual victims. Like, there are girls who know and say... I mean, you can't immediately trust and say what someone says. If a feminist just goes, I've been raped, it becomes like the Me Too movement. It's like you have to listen and believe them instantly without evidence and say that's evidence. But, you know, evidence is, you've got lots of different things about the same event from lots of different sources. And with the Epstein thing, you've got people saying they were raped by Epstein celebrities, shall we call them, or Epstein politicians, and you've got the Epstein files. So you've got like proof on its own. like the women saying we've been raped by these people wouldn't be evidence, but having that plus the files and like plus other articles of evidence, that builds up to the point where it's like, oh, there are 5 things saying that this happened, this event. That can be considered more like evidence because you've got like lots of different things pointing to the same outcome, that these young women were raped on this island by celebrities who were groomed by this eccentric, crazy, rich person who has a lot of evidence and was using that rape stuff to blackmail politicians into getting policy put through. Little break here. I've got to sum up because my GoPro's overheating. Not only is it one of the hottest days we've had so far, yeah, the GoPro overheats anyway, so I was pouring water on this. If you hear a trickle trickle glug glug or a muted audio, it is because, well, I've taken the wind cover off and I've doused this in water to cool it down, and it hasn't been entirely successful. So what was I saying? Yeah, so it's not a good political tactic. It's just a terrible idea to just go calling people things like Nazi and pedo without evidence in your discourse, in your arguments with the people you come across. Also, I think it's another bad tactic just to succumb to the left calling you a racist by saying, oh yeah, sure, I'll be, you know, I'm your huckleberry, like I'm gonna be the racist you want me to be. Just because the left's calling you that doesn't mean you are that, and I think that's a big trap that the right wing have fallen into, is to embrace these terms like far right and racist when I don't think they really are. But, you know, that's their mistaken war tactic, I think. Yeah, so again, we have a big lino problem. There are a lot of people calling themselves libertarians and AnCaps and anarchists who aren't those things. So you kind of, when you're talking about serious AnCap and freedom principle stuff, you kind of have to go beyond labels. You have to listen to what people are saying. And even like in your enemies, you have to see the nuggets of freedom shining through. Like, you could talk to a normie, you could talk to a leftist even. You could, sometimes, talk to a rightist conservative. And every now and then they'll happen upon a subject. They'll be walking along and they'll step on the stone in their conversation that is, taxation is theft, or, you know, I don't like my property violated, or, you know, rape and slavery are bad, or we shouldn't really be doing identity politics, or, you know, they'll happen upon the good topic, the good take in their accidental meanderings through the fog, their blundering around in the dark, in their weird statist, government-kissing, socialist snogging ideologies. They'll go ranting about that for a while, and it'll be cringe and unbearable to listen to. And then every once in a while, if you can put up with them long enough, they'll accidentally step on, you know, the good shape of stepping stone. they'll be on target. They'll accidentally say something freedom-pilled, based to AnCap, liberty-minded, property-minded, consent and voluntary-minded. And when you get them there, you have to encourage that spark, just like you have to encourage any, like, bravery against the government, against police, against socialism, socialist behaviours and feminist behaviours. Whenever you see that, you should be like, that's based. What you're saying now is based. What you're saying next is going to be fucking cringe, and I'm going to start turning off and ignoring you. But what you're saying now, I'm happy that you're saying it. I really love this moment. This, what you're saying, oh, it's fantastic what you're saying now. And then they'll go off meandering again into statism, and you'll just be like, yeah, cringe. Leave them alone until they say something based again. Then you can go like, oh, I love that. I love that you're saying that. Fantastic. Fuck yes. Yeah. And then you can give one of your own examples that is voluntarist and liberty-minded to bolster that, just for the moment that it's happening. Just make them feel like something just happened and they said something that was really good. A lot of people don't get that praise, I think, in the modern day, because no one talks anymore. No one properly communicates as they did in the past. and no one's brash or brazen, nothing stands out. Anyway, before my GoPro overheats, that's a point. I'm ending that point. That's something you should do. Encourage freedom when you see it, and bravery. Back onto that podcast, which you should watch, with the White Pill. Patrick Smith then goes on later in the podcast to talk about something that I believe is cringe, that I don't agree with him on, which is like, you're at a restaurant and you see other parents of other kids, not your kids, call me, other people's kids. And this is where I'm like, kids should be the property of their parents, because commies will weasel in, or people with communist ideas will weasel in and think that they can raise other people's kids. And that's where I think stewardship as a concept fails and does not prevent communism and socialism and government from weaseling in there and trying to teach your kids away from you. Like the concept of teachers in a non-voluntary sense, teachers that haven't been approved by the parents of the biological parents of the child are in essence socialism that has come down from government. Like the idea of like curriculums and things, government approved messaging and ways of training your child that you supposedly have to adhere to, or they'll threaten you and they'll try and take away your child and use all these like 3-letter agencies like Child Protective Services to try and take your child away from you, which I would have said in the past was like taking your property away from you. But now I'm just like, can you say taking your stewardship subject away from you? It doesn't really work in the same way, So just the idea of like, and conservatives, this is where conservatives fall into socialism, away from like voting and elections. Conservatives can fall into socialism in a lot of other ways, whether it's censorship or sexual racial segregation or whatever. This is one of those ways, is conservatives think that they are permitted to try and raise other people's kids or be responsible for, accountable for, or have strong influence on other people's kids who do not belong to them in terms of maybe not property, okay, but you've produced this kid via a voluntary union. You created this kid and you're raising this kid. Whether you want to call that property or stewardship, I don't know, man. But the fact that like you created this kid and you raise this kid, someone like the government or a teacher or a commie can then come along, or a conservative even, same thing at the end of the day, can come along and say, oh, your kid's actually my kid now, I'm going to fill his head with my doctrine, my rules, my ideas about life, my ways of living life. I'm going to propagandize, influence, control, and indoctrinate the person that you've created, that you're meant to be raising. Like, I now take precedence over your child. Isn't that more getting close to like the paedophilia, the socialism, the government sort of thing? When you let that be the case, when you let someone weasel their way into claiming your child away from you. And I had to say, what Patrick Smith was saying was very cringe there. He was saying that, like, you go into a restaurant and it does get into that thing of smacking a child for discipline. He's saying that if another parent is physically disciplining their child in a public space, that he was first saying, I don't want to get involved in the parenting of other people's kids, but he immediately jumped into contradicting that and saying that he would stand up in the restaurant, make a very uncomfortable situation, admirably with his speech, I guess, free speech, you can't really argue with that. He would yell, as I guess he'd make a noise disturbance, he'd like yell as loud as he could, stop hurting that child, to make a scene in the restaurant to everyone that's there, to make an uncomfortable situation to the parents. Basically he's like telling the parents off for parenting their child in their way. because he disagrees with the smacking as discipline thing, whereas there are other people who don't, and he's on the train of the stewardship, which is like the child is property of itself, like even though it can't consent and doesn't know the meaning of property because it's not old enough, it's not been raised to the point where it understands that, like it gets into this whole thing of the child's not really old enough. How can it be a self-owner if it's not the stage where it can consent, because there's no informed consent, it doesn't know what it's getting itself into, he or she is getting itself into as a child, until it's been raised to that standard by the parents, the biological parents who are meant to be raising it because they created it. So it's like, and it is just communistic behavior, trying to parent other people's kids. So he said he'd make this scene and he'd stand up and yell, he'd use his free speech. That's fine, I guess, but it is kind of like parenting other people's kids, and you have to think what the different reactions to that would be. At one point he was saying he would consider shooting the kids' parents. Like before he got into this whole thing of what can I do that is more mild than this, he was saying like, what could I do? Shoot them on the spot? It's like, again, this to me is where stewardship falls down, because he thinks he's like shooting them as some form of defense of property, but it's defense of property that he doesn't own, and he slips into right-wing socialism. But he's like, well, the child can own itself, and then that gets into my argument where it's like, no, the child doesn't understand how to own itself yet because it hasn't got the information for informed consent. And then you can make the argument, well, it's not being raised by a voluntarist or something, so it's not being raised, you could say it's not being raised to understand consent correctly or something. Is that a thing? That's something, that's a branch I haven't explored, whether that's a thing. There's lots of, like, my arguments are like a tree with lots of different branches, and I've explored certain branches of them to see if they work or not, and the ones I haven't been down are, there's like a different coloured branch if you wanted to visualise this analogy. But yeah, it's a controversial topic. It gets people riled up and angry, I understand that, but you have to learn not to get triggered or offended when you hear speech. You have to like try and see this calmly, try and take your emotions out of it, not be a fucking knee-jerk rage bait person when you hear certain subjects like this, whether it be animal cruelty or safety and regulation, or children and families, like whether it's like sex and trafficking or whatever. You can't let emotion seep in to how you think about these topics, else you're not going to come to the right conclusions. Your judgment's going to be so clouded. So I thought it was cringe that he would stand up and shout this in a public place, and I'm not sure he's thought it through, what the reaction would be from everyone around him. I'm not sure he's fully thought that through. And he starts tearing up after he said it. Like, you can see he let himself get emotional. It's physically apparent because he actually starts like crying a little bit after he says it. I think part of the reason he was crying was that he said himself he got too intense during the interview, and he actually shouted to the guy who was interviewing him to make the point of what he was doing. He actually physically shouted in the interview, and I think he must have noticed that there would be an uncomfortable reaction to that, and he said himself that there would be an uncomfortable reaction to that, and there is a reason for that, and it's not the one he's thinking it is. Like, he's saying that this is like an uncomfort for bravery's sake, but like a discomfort you make for a principle. But actually, I think there's a part of what he's doing which is wrong, and behind it all, he notices that it's wrong and that it's not a correct thing to do. And that, I think, is the part of what made him kind of tear up and get emotional after he projected his voice in that interview. to say, "Stop hurting that child." Like, he thinks it's some sort of brave, courageous thing to do, but I think that's actually a core of his authoritarian days sneaking back up on him, sneaking into the forefront of his mind, and he doesn't realize that because he's not really learned to control his emotions on the controversial subjects. Anyway, so that's part 2 of the AnCap versus parenting and stewardship conversation. I'm gonna cut this short now because my GoPro will overheat again. Thank you for watching.